القيادة ليست منصباً بل تأثير، رؤية وإلهام.
Hello everyone, welcome to Leadership Podcast from GMTC. Our guest today is the head of British support team here in Palestine, Brigadier General Will Strickland. A quick introduction about our guest. He commissioned into a heavy tank cavalry regiment in 1998. He served as commanding officer to the Army Foundation College. At operational level, he served in Army Headquarters and Ministry of Defence for UK Military Strategy and Operations in the Middle East. He served as Chief of Staff Special Operations Joint Task Force. He has served in Afghanistan and Iraq. He has attended Advanced Command and Staff course. He has a master's degree and PhD degree in politics and international relationship. Sir, it's a great honor to have you with us here today, really.
Thank you very much for having me, and I look forward to the discussion with you.
Most welcome, sir. You are here so we can learn from your experience. So before we jump into leadership topic, if you take us back to Sandhurst when you were a cadet and during training, what was the moment you think that had impacted and had a significant impact on your career?
So in terms of what I learnt at Sandhurst and how did that have an impact?
How impact your
So I think the biggest thing about Sandhurst is that it's a very collective form of training with a whole lot of people who are roughly the same age as you, and it occurs over the course of a year. So you become very close to those people, and you become close to those individuals through quite rigorous training. And so we go. And when I was going through it at that stage, they were genuinely hard things to do for a new officer cadet. And I think it's that mixture of a very close bond with your fellow officer cadets and rigorous and hard training that forms your character at that point and helps you throughout your career.
Mm-hmm. I know Sandhurst is Royal Military Academy is the most prestigious college in the world, I think, and many Arabs, senior officers, very important officers and kings who graduated from Sandhurst. Why do you think that Sandhurst, what differentiates Sandhurst from other military college? Why Sandhurst is unique?
Well, so I think a number of things. So there is obviously a very deep history to it in the British system, and it's been going on for, in various different guises for centuries. And but also there is a history of former colonies and now rightfully independent states and countries that send their cadets to train with us. And that's what's most remarkable about it, I think, is that there are so many former colonies that provide officer cadets there and enjoy still getting the experience. So I think there's a deep, remarkable relationship between the UK and countries that we've had an effect on in the past. But in terms of directly answering your question, what is the quality of Sandhurst? Some of it is very much cultural, and it is the standards that we provide, whether it's as we were talking about before, the sort of etiquette of how you dress and should behave, but also the rigor of the training as well. And I don't think there are many courses that are so rigorous as that over the course of a year.
Mm-hmm. Strict etiquette.
Strict with etiquette.
I think it's because of the strict etiquette. So how do you define leadership?
So leadership is as you know, is a slippery subject. And I was just sort of, what is leadership from my perspective, which is a question you sort of asked me. And I think there's a number of different ways to look at it. But when you're leading and commanding soldiers, what I always think is the most critical aspect is that your judgment is right and you're an effective leader. And soldiers will not follow you if they think you're not going to enact the right solution and it's going to be effective. So I think above all, judgment and effectiveness. Secondly, I think leadership by example is very important as well. That if you're not willing to do what your soldiers are willing to do and need to do, and you're ordering them to do, then they will find it hard to follow you. And in certain circumstances, that requires taking, calculated risks to demonstrate that you're willing to lead from the front. And then the third sort of aspect that I always think of with leadership is communication. That if you're, as a leader, if you cannot communicate verbally and in your positional body language and get the right mood, but also in a written way as well, you can't lead, and therefore I think communication is very important as well. And then I think we'll talk about teamwork as we go through, but there's a very close relationship, as you know, between leadership and teamwork, and understanding your team and building that team is a facet of leadership as well. Mm-hmm. And you might define leadership also by various traits you have, whether that is confidence, intellect,
courage,
empathy, courage. And I think we'll come back to courage, but I think courage is potentially it's something that you force yourself to do against your wishes, which is about self-determination. But we can talk about that in due course, of course.
So you have mentioned risk. Are you a risk taker? Because sometimes, as an officer, you have to take risk. And do you think that taking risk is good or not good?
So I think calculated risks are essential, particularly in warfare. And warfare is one big game of risk. But the important thing in relating it to leadership is that your soldiers will not want you to be taking unnecessary and uncalculated risks, and therefore they need to be about achieving the mission, and they need to be calculated, and they can't be whimsical and what we call off the cuff.
So sometimes we have to take risk.
Absolutely, yeah.
So how is military leadership different from civilian leadership?
So in the military, you will ultimately you are ultimately signing up to pay the ultimate price of warfare and fighting and potentially dying, and therefore I think it alludes to your question on risk, that it is if you are making that ultimate potential sacrifice, then you need to be clear about those risks you are taking. And obviously there are various different aspects of command and training that are very different from civilian leadership. And often I think civilian leadership is more about management than it is about leadership.
Great. So as a head of British support team here in Palestine, what is your goal and what is your strategic goal, and how are you gonna help your team, and how do you deal with your team and work with your team to achieve your goal and the goal of BST?
So the British support team has been in Ramallah for 17 years, and the British state is very supportive of Palestine and the two-state solution. And so our role as part of that British mission is to support the Palestinian security forces, help to develop them, and build confidence in the West Bank. In terms of how I inspire my team to do that, we have a very mixed team, which is quite interesting. So we have military personnel, we have Palestinians working for us, and we also have sort of international consultants. And so getting all of those three different groups working together absolutely takes teamwork, but it also, and this is exactly what I'm doing, having only been here for 5 to 6 weeks now, it needs clear direction. And so we're going through an estimate to determine exactly how the British support team will support the Palestinian security forces over the next 2 years. And so a mixture of clear direction and building a integrated team, with different groups is my first priority.
As you mentioned, that two-state solution is the core, and it's very important for also our leadership here in Ramallah. And this two-state solution need also a good security forces. So we depend sometimes on you, on Canadian team, on USSC to support us, to share with us their experience, to help us, so we can have very good education and have very good experience from you, gaining from your experience. So let's see.
Yeah, I'm relatively new here, but I have a significant amount of experience that I hope will be helpful from a number of different areas and operations that I've conducted in the past. But having met General Haroon relatively recently, I would stress, and given we're talking about leadership as well, I would stress the importance of training that happens here, that it's the foundations that you give soldiers or other members of the Palestinian security forces. It's that foundation that is critical, and it's that which they will remember for the rest of their careers. And that is what we call the sort of moral component in the British Army, which is not the physical component, not the intellectual component, but some of the characteristics that you either learn or have integral to you that will allow you to make the decisions and conduct potential actions that you might not otherwise want to do. So returning to the subject of courage, the moral component is important to courage.
You said character. Character is something also, I totally agree with you, it's very important. Very important for an officer and for a leader to have a good character. So what do you think character is?
So character is a bit like leadership. It's quite hard to define, isn't it? And so there are some aspects that that are inherent to you. They're given to you through birth, and I think your size, your demeanour, your potentially much of your personality is given to you genetically, but then there are a number of things that form your experiences and character through your life, particularly in your early life, and particularly at places like Sandhurst, and that they're the sort of characteristics that you pick up and learn and that are socialised en route.
So I understand from your words now that leader born and made together. So he will born with the genetic of leadership, and he will develop this genetic and develop himself through courses, through learning to become a leader. So, but
yes.
Genetic is something very important, I think.
Well,
I understand from you.
So I think some of it is. So we have this debate in the UK about nature versus nurture, and are we a product of our socialisation during our life, or are we what we are given by our parents and their parents and the genetics of it? And I think the most significant proportion is nurture, and I think
Nature.
It's what we learn through the early stages of our life, and our parents give us that are the most formulative on us, I think.
Could you share with us one story or critical moment happened during your career and that affected you personally and affected your leadership?
So just I was thinking through some of the sort of toughest decisions that I've had to make, and I've been involved in some relatively and some might say very very difficult operations in Afghanistan, in Helmand province, through the course of my career, and so that that sort of weighs on you, and so that sort of goes to my first point about leadership. Judgment is critical, and in the lead up to that operation, there were a number of commanding officers that did not want to conduct that operation because they knew the risks of it, and we pushed it ahead irrespective. And I think security was brought to Central Helmand for a significant period of time, which could have validated some of the planning and decision making we did, but ultimately we left Afghanistan. So it questions the judgment of was that a correct operation to do? Was that a necessary operation to do? And I think, on balance, it probably was, but a significant cost.
Oh, a really significant cost. But that's bring me to how do you deal in this moment? Like when there is a moment of insecurity, when there is a moment of fear, when there is a moment of discombobulated, how do you deal with this?
So this sort of goes of courage and what courage is, and courage is not the absence of fear. It's mastering your fear. That's the definition of courage. And so how do you master your fears
and insecurity?
And remove any insecurity that you feel you might have from a personal level. And I think one aspect is training, and particularly for me, some of the basics that I learned at Sandhurst, but equally experience of wider training and lots of operations. So I've conducted lots of operations in Kosovo, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, back in Iraq, and in northeast Syria, and so experience gives you confidence to your fears. But I also think, and this is a very traditional view from the British Army, that teamwork is essential to mastering your fears as well. That if you have a body of friends around you who are going through the same type of experience, it becomes easier. And there's a sort of a view in the British Army that we constantly have, that you fight less for your country and more for the teammate next to you.
Again, you fight
less for your country or for for Great Britain, and more for the teammate, the person next to you.
So the sacrifice is for the team more than great. So coming to the team, we'll go back to this team. How do you define future leader with this AI, with this technology, with this changing environment in the world? How do you define future leader? And do you think that AI and this social media and this technology will impact future leaders?
So it's a very good question. So my last job in the British Army was looking at the future of the British Army, and what we needed, both in terms of capability and personnel as well. And within that is the question of what sort of person do you need for the future, both in terms of leadership from the officers and soldiers. And it's a difficult question because warfare is changing, and if you see some of the type of operations being conducted in Ukraine or elsewhere,
4th generation warfare, 5th generation warfare,
exactly, artificial
hybrid warfare,
artificial intelligence being used, drones are being used, strikes are being conducted remotely from drone operators, and so it is a rapidly changing, what we call, character of war. And but at the same time, what you see in Ukraine is the fog of war and the friction of war, and some of the constants of war, what we call the nature of war. And for that, you need leadership like you required it in previous centuries, as much as you need it as before. And so I don't think it's just about remote strikes. I don't think it's about artificial intelligence. And I think the human dimension of warfare, and therefore the necessity for leadership, as it has been in Gaza. It's a very human experience.
I totally agree with you. So how do you train your officers and junior officers in a critical moment to take decision on the ground from your perspective?
So we've got this sort of concept which actually came from the Germans originally during or before World War II, which is called mission command. And so what we try and train traditionally is, because there's so much friction and so much misunderstanding in war, that you need to be able to make a decision at the lowest level. And so what we try and train our junior officers do is to take responsibility for their own actions, and so what we say is we'll only give you the intent of what we want. You need to devise how you're going to do it. And so we give them great freedom of action to determine how they're going to do something according to a common intent.
How do you give that space of action? I mean, how do you give them that space to take a decision?
So we use a sort of in formal warfare. This is we use a system of orders. So at every level we expect commanders to conduct an estimate and then give a set of orders, but we train our officers not to be too deterministic about those orders. So not too much detail, and to provide broad intent to allow freedom of decision making at the lowest level. So, for example, we would give an effect of you need to go and secure that village or that town. We wouldn't tell them how to do it. We would expect them to work that.
You tell them what to do, and they will do it in their way.
Correct, but to be able to do that effectively, you need a certain amount of doctrine. You need to have adequate training, and you need to have competent leaders as well.
But you have to give them latitude.
You need to give them latitude. Yeah.
You don't have to control them every time and tell
Correct.
them what to do. Okay, so going back to the team, I remember something very important. Now, you say that your team sometimes will not follow you in the beginning of our interview. What do you think that the reason that your team will not follow you, and how you see it from your perspective that they can follow you, or how they will follow you, how they can follow you, what you have to do so you can encourage them to follow you, and what is the reason maybe they will not follow you? As you just said in the beginning of the interview, you said sometimes the team will not follow you if you are not a good leader. Correct,
and so I think there are a number of reasons, but I think judgment is critical. So if you're not going to make the right decision and you're going to send soldiers into an area where they will unnecessarily risk their lives, they may follow you once or twice, but continuing to do that will be difficult and rightly so.
The right decision. Okay.
But also think beyond that. So if you have good judgment and you're making the right tactical decisions about what you should do and they're likely to be effective, then there are sort of characteristics and ways of forming teams that are also important. So too much direction will be difficult for a team, and therefore it must be more of a collaboration. And I'm not saying that should always be the case, and they should expect orders. If you are inconsistent in your style, then soldiers will find that difficult as well. And so there are a number of reasons, but forming an effective team is part of leadership, as we discussed. If you want to get into this sort of discussion about what makes a toxic leader or what makes an inadequate leader, the answer is normally that either they're incompetent and incapable of doing the job they've been given, and therefore they're finding ways of doing it which hides that, or they're just thinking about themselves. And there must be a selflessness about your leadership that your subordinate soldiers and officers can see and realise that you're acting in their best interests or the interests of conducting an operation.
Toxic leadership. I think, from my perspective, when we say toxic, there is no leadership. So how are you gonna know that from your experience that leader is toxic and this leadership is toxic?
So I think that's a fair point. And so if you're toxic, you can't be a leader. So you might be a toxic commander or a toxic officer. And it's a much used term that's misunderstood. But I would say the best example of that type of behaviour is someone thinking about themselves rather than their subordinates.
Great, very great. So that brings us to great leader and good leader. What makes a great leader different than a good leader?
Well, so I was thinking about this, and it's quite a difficult question, this, isn't it? And and some is circumstance, isn't it? And so, Churchill, Winston Churchill,
Prime Minister of...
would he have been considered a great leader if World War II had not happened? And I think he would have arguably, given his problems before the Second World War, would have been considered a failure. And so I think circumstance and rising to the occasion is an important aspect of this. But I think we've talked about particular characteristics of leadership, and so an appetite for calculated risk, built-in judgment is critical, and you're not going to become a great leader without that. I think force of personality is also really important, and within the bounds of reason, never giving up and using every ability you've got to get to the right solution of what you're being ordered to do. Rhetoric and speech is often considered important for a leader, but
communication, as I've mentioned.
Communication, which is what we mentioned. But I was just thinking about this also, that so we always look at Henry V as an important leader in Britain at the Battle of Agincourt, and Shakespeare wrote or recited his famous speech before the battle, which roused the soldiers to be able to fight at Agincourt and motivated. And I think there is obviously something in that. But if Henry V had not won Agincourt, I don't think that speech would have been remembered. And then I think there is. I think probably most central to it is a mixture of luck. Napoleon always said luck was the most important thing, and for his commanders, but also tactical judgment. So our famous leaders of people like Marlborough, of Wellington, of Montgomery, it was a mixture of circumstance, luck of being in the right place, but then when you were in the right place and could make the right decision, then significant tactical judgment, and therefore they were making the right decisions in battle and reaching the right solution.
You mentioned failure when you said Churchill. So do you think that failure something good for leadership, that when you fail, that you will learn and you will stand up and you will learn from your failure and you will go again? So I need your perspective about failure.
So I think failure is very important, and we always say that in training in the British Army, that we should fail as much as we succeed, if not more so. And I think, I can't remember the exact phrase Churchill gave on failure, but he essentially said the vast majority of his life had been a failure, and it was just a few episodic moments of success that made him. And I think you're right, absolutely right in asking this question, because I think failure is as important as success.
I just think there will be dark, and there will be without dark there will be no light. So you have to fail, and you have to learn from your failure, and you have to get up and keep moving forward. That's what you just have said about you have to motivate your soldiers and to support them morally also. So I would like to know about the toughest decision have you taken in your career, and if you remember one toughest decision you have taken in your career during your work.
Well, so I've sort of recounted that sort of decision that I made in Helmand Province in 2009, and that was it felt tough at the time because people underneath me were pushing back and didn't want to do make the decision, and so it required the force of will to make that decision and get that operation instigated and successfully completed. And the reason it's the toughest decision for me is not only because it was contested, but because at the end of it there was so much loss of life and injured people. So I think that's undoubtedly been my hardest decision in the course of my career. But there have been others. So I was in Iraq in the early days, and where there was a significant amount of improvised explosive devices that were killing a lot of soldiers, and so making soldiers go out every day to conduct operations is a tough decision when you know there's a high chance of being blown up. And similarly, later in Iraq and northeast Syria against ISIS, asking your partner forces to take most of the casualties rather than yourselves is quite a hard decision to make as well, and it doesn't come naturally to a military person.
It's a very unique experience, I think, when you have served in Iraq and Afghanistan, taught you many lessons. I would like you to share with us, if you don't mind, books that you have read, 2 or 1 book that you advise us to read in general.
So I've as you kindly said at the beginning, that I've got a PhD in politics and international relations, so I've read a lot of books, but I thought what would be most useful for you, and I just so I think at the lower level, the most inspirational book I read when I was a junior officer was My Early Life by Winston Churchill. Explains Winston Churchill as he joined. It was my regiment that he joined in India, and didn't like being in India with my regiment as a young subaltern, a young officer, and so found a way to work his way to the northeast frontier in what's now Pakistan, and spent a lot of time there, and then conducted a whole lot of operations. And so it is a story of daring, of courage, and of adventure, and of a search to be useful in the world and to make a difference. And so it's a very inspiring book, and it certainly inspired me when I was a junior officer. And then I was thinking, what is a useful book at the highest level? And I always think H.R. McMaster's Dereliction of Duty is a very good and insightful book to read. And he wrote this as a major in the US Army, and he was looking at some of the highest level decisions about Vietnam in the 1960s, and he found a lot of the problems were a lack of leadership amongst senior military personnel in the Pentagon, and that's and a lot of that is because of self-interest, because of politics, because of bureaucracy, and he sort of in that book lamented the lack of leadership amongst the Joint Chiefs, and so I always think so if you're looking for an example of low inspirational for young officers and soldiers, Winston Churchill, and then if you're looking for a tale of poor leadership and lessons for the future, then H.R. McMaster and the Dereliction of Duty.
You brought to me 3 questions. You said about you have studied in you have studied politics and international relationship. Why did you take that road? You are a military officer, so what motivates you to go to study?
Well, so reading something like Winston Churchill and his interest in politics, and then some other books subsequently started my interest, I think. But also the nature of the operations I've been involved in, through the course of my career, whether in the Balkans, whether in the Middle East, or whether in Afghanistan, have been very deeply political and sociological in nature, and to do with international relations as well. And so understanding politics and sociology is fundamental to finding solutions in somewhere like Afghanistan, and they're also fundamental to understanding the problems in the West Bank, or the problems in Gaza, or the problems in this region. And so in my view, if you don't, as a relatively senior army officer, that if you don't have an understanding of politics, you can't do your job properly in somewhere like this.
I totally agree with you. So we have to read history, and we have to read politics. The second one is bureaucracy. You have just mentioned bureaucracy. Do you believe that bureaucracy should be implemented in the military, and in the headquarters and in the military?
So my firm view on this is that we should be very careful of bureaucracy, and in one sense, the military is a bureaucratic organisation and it's designed to be very bureaucratic in a hierarchical, ordered way. In another sense, there are huge issues with modern bureaucracy, as we know, and bureaucracy tends to expand. It tends to create people that work within them that are not interested in the outcomes of those institutions, and it tends to become, although designed to be efficient and effective, tends to become inefficient and ineffective over time. So my strong view over the course of my career is we need to reduce the size of organisations the whole time, and we need to fight to have small organisations making effective and efficient decisions rather than large organisations that are very difficult to control and quite often have their own institutional interests. And that's exactly what H.R. McMaster was suggesting in Dereliction of Duty.
So you are not with bureaucracy. You want to minimize the organisation so there can be, as we say, latitude and there's a space for...
I'm not saying we should be without any bureaucracy. I'm saying we should fight to have small headquarters.
Okay. And third question is, how many hours do you read a day?
So at the moment, very little. But previously, I've read a lot, and particularly when I was a junior officer. So. I'm a tank soldier, so there's quite a lot of inactivity on exercises or waiting for things to happen. You're always waiting for something to happen in the army, aren't you? And so I always used to read when I was sitting in my tank and there was nothing going on, or there was free time. So I read a lot when I was young, and then I sort of formally studied and read these things as I've been conducting masters and PhDs.
Last question, sir, and it's not a question, it's advice from your side to officers in general, junior officers and senior officers here in Palestine, and in general, in any countries in the world. What you advise them?
In terms of being a junior officer, I'd firstly advise them just to enjoy it, and being a young officer or a young soldier in an armed force should be an enjoyable thing to do for the majority of time, and you need to make friends. You need to become team members, and you need to enjoy leading as well. And it should be an enjoyable experience. If it's not, you're in the wrong profession, I would suggest. I've had a very enjoyable career, and I wouldn't change much of it, if at all. What other advice would I give? Think deeply, read deeply, train hard, think carefully about leadership, think carefully about how you're going to command every single different position you conduct, and just wake up every morning and try and ask the question of how can I be a better leader today? How can I improve on my past failures or part triumphs?
Sir, I wish you all the best in your mission here in Palestine, and Godspeed. It was a pleasure to have you, sir.
Thank you very much. Absolute pleasure to be here.
Most welcome.